is the Rosetta Stone. It was the key to understanding Egyptian hieroglyphics, and it is one of the most precious and valuable treasures of the British Museum.
For a long time, it was believed that the original and most important text inscribed on the Rosetta Stone was in Greek, intended to convey a royal decree praising the pharaoh to the people. But gradually, this stone became the greatest key to understanding ancient Egypt, a civilization whose language and thought had been almost entirely lost to time. However, some parts of it have always been missing. Entire lines have faded over time. Now, AI has accomplished what generations of experts could not. When AI re-examined the stone, the story took a strange turn. The machine began to read parts that the human eye had overlooked. Extremely fine patterns, worn carvings, and hidden clues beneath the surface all began to emerge. For centuries, we have considered the Rosetta Stone a bridge between languages, helping us understand hieroglyphs and giving us the voice of an entire civilization. The text inscribed on it appears in three forms: hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek. The Greek language was never lost, so it became the greatest aid. But the new discoveries have both surprised and unsettled historians, because it seems that the story inscribed on the Rosetta Stone may not be what we have believed for so long. Now the question is, what is the true meaning hidden within this stone, and why are there some truths that even experts hesitate to accept? Let's understand this in detail in this video, but before that, subscribe to the channel. This video is not like a normal video, so be sure to watch it completely. The Rosetta Stone is the black stone that became the key to unlocking the greatest secret of ancient Egyptian civilization. It is a large piece of granite, about 1 meter tall, slightly wide and thick, weighing about 700 or 800 kilograms. The same text is inscribed on it in 3 different scripts, on one side in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, on another in the common Egyptian script, demotic, and on the third in Greek. Now for the real story. How was this stone discovered? It was the year 1799. Napoleon Bonaparte had come to Egypt with his French army. He wasn't just fighting battles, he also had a large contingent of scientists, engineers, and artists with him. They wanted to discover and understand the ancient artifacts of Egypt. Napoleon had assembled an entire team that was documenting everything about Egypt in notebooks. The discovery was made near a small town called Rosetta, located at the mouth of the Nile River. There was an old fort there called Fort Julien. French soldiers were repairing the walls and excavating the fort to reinforce it. On July 15, 1799, a soldier discovered this stone while digging. It was stuck in a fort wall. When he pulled it out, he saw that it had some writing on it. Captain Pierre-François Bouchard, under whose command the work was being carried out, realized this was no ordinary stone. He could read Greek, and it had written something important on it. He immediately informed his senior officers. The news reached Napoleon. Napoleon saw it himself and was delighted. His scientists declared it a great treasure, because until then, no one could read Egyptian hieroglyphs. They were a complete mystery, undeciphered for thousands of years. But this stone also had Greek, which Europeans knew. So everyone thought it might reveal the secret of the hieroglyphs. What happened next? Napoleon's army didn't last long. In 1801, the British defeated the French. When the French were retreating, the British agreed to hand over all the important materials. The Rosetta Stone also fell into British hands. In 1802, it was taken to London and placed in the British Museum. By around July 1799, the strange black tablet had reached the capital, where scholars were carefully examining it. People hoped to find a statue or some treasure, but in reality it turned out to be a 2,000-year-old royal decree. It contained the same text 3 times, only in 3 different scripts: ancient hieroglyphics at the top, common demotic script in the middle, and Greek at the bottom. This decree was issued by the assembly of priests in Memphis in praise of their young king, Ptolemy III. Its special feature was that all 3 scripts were present simultaneously. The Greek script was still legible, and this opened the way to deciphering the other 2 silent scripts. The stone itself was not a monumental monument, but a dark, hard, volcanic stone, with tiny pink and brown flecks shining through it. It was approximately 3.5 feet long, a little over 2.5 feet wide, and nearly a foot thick, and weighed so much that ropes and rollers were required to lift it. The stone's story didn't end there. After a long siege of Alexandria, the French army surrendered to the British and Ottoman forces. As part of the agreement, all the antiquities collected by Napoleon's scholars were handed over to the British, including this stone. In early 1802, it arrived in England, was first shown to scholars, and then placed in the British Museum, where it remains today. The white writing on its edges can still be seen, stating that it had been captured by the British Army from Egypt in 1801 and presented to King George III. Meanwhile, in Cairo, a printer named Jean-Joseph Marcel made direct impressions from the stone, and Nicolas Jacques Conté created exact copies of the letters using ink and wet paper. Upon returning to London, plaster casts of these copies were sent to various universities. Within a few months, copies of it had spread throughout Europe and America, making Ptolemy V's decree the first ancient text to be seen and read by almost the entire world simultaneously. The Greek portion of the stone was the first to be understood. By 1803, scholars had fully deciphered it, and it became clear that it wasn't just ordinary writing, but a government decree issued in praise of King Ptolemy, granting several special privileges to temples and priests. Attention then turned to the middle section, written in the common Egyptian demotic script. The French scholar Sylvestre de Sacy and the Swedish diplomat Johann David Åkerblad made an interesting discovery. They noticed that certain names were written repeatedly in the same way, and gradually they began to understand that these symbols represented not just pictures, but also sounds. This is where the real story gained momentum. The British scholar Thomas Young compared the Greek names to the demotic names and then carefully examined the hieroglyphic section at the top. There he found some symbols enclosed in oval frames, which were later called cartouches. His hunch proved correct. These were royal names. In one of them, he was able to identify the letters of the name Ptolemy. This step might seem small, but it proved that hieroglyphs were not merely decorative, but also contained phonetic elements. Nearly 20 years later, in 1822, the complete solution to the puzzle was found. The young French scholar Jean-François Champollion demonstrated that the Egyptian hieroglyphic script was actually a mixed system of pictures and sounds, just like a proper language. Using the Coptic language, he showed that hieroglyphs also operated with rules and grammar. On September 14th, he presented his discovery in Paris and was so overwhelmed with emotion that he fainted. On that day, the language of ancient Egypt was, in a sense, brought back to life. However, the stone itself was not in good condition. The upper hieroglyphic section was the most damaged. Only 14 lines remained. The middle demotic section had 32 lines, but the beginning of 14 of them was missing. The lower Greek section had 54 lines, but a diagonal break in the stone left 26 of them incomplete. This break allowed for an estimate of what the complete monument might have looked like. Other decrees from that period indicate that such stones had a rounded top section on which a figure of the king was carved in front of the gods. Measurements suggest that the missing upper piece contained approximately another half-foot of hieroglyphs. That section was never found, and what we have today is only about 2/3 of the complete monument. Fortunately, this decree was not unique. The Greek section clearly stated that the same message was to be inscribed in all 3 scripts and displayed in temples throughout Egypt. This order led to the creation of many copies at the time, and luckily, some of them have survived to this day. Later, archaeologists discovered several such copies. A limestone slab found in Nubera preserved the parts that were broken off from the Rosetta Stone. Similarly, 2 copies were found inscribed on the walls of the temple at Philae, near Egypt's southern border. Traces of it were also found in other places, such as Elephantine and Naucratis. Not every copy was exactly the same. Slight variations were made depending on the region where the stele was erected. In some places, the queen's name was added after the king's marriage, while in others, greater emphasis was placed on a particular victory, such as the suppression of rebels in the south or the defense of the city of Lycopolis in the north. But no copy contradicted the text found on the Rosetta Stone. The differences simply reflected local pride and politics. These small differences have proven invaluable to modern researchers. If one copy breaks off mid-sentence, another often continues the same thought. By comparing the texts line by line, scholars can reconstruct the entire decree with considerable confidence. The writing system also helps. The Demotic script is read from right to left, Greek from left to right, and the hieroglyphs also proceed from right to left in small groups of images. Once the direction is clear, the meaning of the missing sections becomes apparent. And because the message was the same in all 3 scripts, what was lost in one place could be filled in from another. Yet some sections remain incomplete. This is where modern technology comes in. Using advanced imaging and AI, scientists can scan the surface of the stone with incredible precision, detecting even the faintest carvings that are almost impossible to see with the naked eye. These modern scans create a digital map of the stone, revealing even the slightest scratches. Then, machine learning systems, trained on thousands of examples of hieroglyphs, come into play. These systems match the patterns in the blank spaces to the remaining fragments and other copies of the same decree, predicting what was originally written there. It's not about inventing something new, but rather finding matching patterns based on what already exists. The AI identifies broken or worn parts, compares them to intact characters and other inscriptions, and then suggests which symbols might be missing. The meaning of the decree was never a secret, however. It praises the generosity of King Ptolemy V. His decisions to grant tax relief, donate land to temples, release prisoners, and commission statues of the gods. It also orders that this message be inscribed in all 3 scripts and displayed in every major temple so that priests, scribes, and Greek officials could all read it. The Rosetta Stone was once the key that helped humanity understand the long-forgotten language of ancient Egypt. Today, that same stone has become a link between human understanding and artificial intelligence, revealing the last traces that time had worn away. Now, light, computer code, and algorithms are working together to accomplish what even the sharpest minds of the 19th century could not, making the stone speak again. Beneath the surface of the Rosetta Stone, a faint voice still lies hidden, dating back 2,000 years, buried under scratches, wear and tear, and the ravages of time. To hear it again, scientists didn't start with direct translation. They began by looking, using tools that could see beyond the human eye. The first step was light. In the digital Rosetta Stone project, the entire surface of the stone was photographed repeatedly. each time with light shining from a different angle and direction. Even the slightest difference in lighting casts a shadow on a groove or illuminates a raised area. When all these images are combined, they create a height map, a kind of 3D image that records every minute detail of the stone's surface. This transforms the stone into a digital landscape that you can rotate, zoom in on, and view under different lighting conditions. The result is that even areas that previously appeared completely smooth reveal fine carvings and hidden letters. But simply examining the stone's texture wasn't enough. The Rosetta Stone was once painted. Although those colors are no longer visible today, their faint traces are still hidden within the grooves. To capture these, scientists employed a special technique called hyperspectral imaging. This goes far beyond ordinary photography. While our eyes can only perceive a limited range of colors, these cameras can capture hundreds of different wavelengths of light, including those invisible to the human eye. Under specific conditions, different minerals, ancient pigments, and even tool marks glow in distinct ways. Areas that appear completely blank in normal light suddenly reveal traces of faded markings. By combining these hidden colors, researchers have been able to uncover details that were thought to have been lost for centuries. But the work wasn't finished with just light and color. The next challenge was teaching the computer how to interpret these shapes. Ancient Egyptian writing isn't in neat, straight lines like today's script. The symbols are clustered together, overlapping each other. A bird might be perched on top of a loaf of bread, or a snake coiled among reeds. For a human, it's art, but for a computer, initially it was just a tangled mess of lines. So, scientists trained artificial intelligence to recognize each symbol individually. They showed it thousands of images, falcons, eyes, snakes, and other Egyptian symbols, and taught the system what each symbol looked like. The AI model used was originally designed to recognize people or cars in ordinary photographs, but after retraining, it learned a new skill: identifying and outlining ancient symbols carved in stone. Once trained, it automatically isolates each symbol, even where the carvings are intertwined or faded. The result is truly astonishing. Now, every tiny bird, eye, or twist of rope appears in its own clear digital outline, as if an invisible highlighter had been run over the stone, making everything stand out. Identifying the symbols was only the first step. The real question was what all these symbols meant when put together. For this, a different type of AI was used, one that understands patterns in the same way that humans understand language. Just as today's translation apps learn the order and rhythm of words, this model learns the rhythm of hieroglyphs. By analyzing thousands of Egyptian texts, the system learns which symbols frequently appear together. Just as in English, when you hear thank, your brain automatically adds you. This pattern recognition ability comes in handy when a piece of the stone is broken and some markings are missing. The model can look at the markings before and after the break and estimate what would best fit in between. A recent project, called the Hieroglyphic Transformer, was built on this idea. It used data from the vast Thesaurus Linguae Egyptiae library in Berlin, which contains Egyptian inscriptions collected from around the world. The AI was trained on this data to predict which symbols were most likely to be present in the missing parts of a sequence of hieroglyphs. It doesn't guess randomly, but rather uses linguistic patterns and recurring structures to narrow down the possibilities. This is why the combination of two types of AI proved so effective. One system can see and identify the remaining symbols on the stone, while the other understands their meaning and context, helping to fill in the gaps. Together, they make it possible to decipher lines that have been considered incomplete for centuries. Interestingly, this approach is not entirely new. Similar work has been done on other ancient scripts before. In 2019, an AI called Pythia was created that could predict missing letters in fragmented Greek inscriptions. When a stone was heavily damaged, the system would compare it to thousands of other examples and provide a short list of possible answers. Remarkably, the correct answer was found in that list almost 3 out of 4 times. Later, another AI called Ithaca took this even further. It not only helped fill in missing words, but also suggested the likely time period and geographical location of the inscription. In practical use, historians found that working with this AI made their work faster and more accurate. In the case of the Rosetta Stone, this type of AI is particularly useful. The reason is clear. Multiple copies of the same decree have been found in different locations, such as Nubaira and Philae. AI can combine all of this in seconds and instantly tell you which sentence or line matches where. What used to take scholars weeks of painstaking work can now be done in an instant. By 2025, this approach had extended to Latin texts as well. DeepMind developed an AI system called Aeneas, whose job was to find matching passages in damaged ancient texts by comparing them to other records. It scans not only the writing, but also the images, finding fragments where the same name or line appears again. When all these steps are combined, deciphering and reconstructing, the Rosetta Stone seems quite straightforward. First, scientists create a near-perfect digital image of the stone. This involves taking thousands of photos from different angles and under varying lighting conditions, then combining them to create a 3D map of the surface. This reveals even the carvings that are invisible to the naked eye. Then, AI is employed to create clear outlines of every remaining mark. Each outline is then given a digital identity, like a fingerprint, that identifies whether it's the symbol of a falcon or a reed leaf. Once each symbol is identified, it is compared with the other 2 scripts present on the same stone, Demotic and Greek, since all 3 contain the same message. If a section of the hieroglyphic text is broken or missing, the system doesn't stop there. It automatically retrieves a copy of the same decree from another Egyptian temple. For example, if a sentence is missing on the Rosetta Stone, but the complete sentence exists on the Nubaira stele, the AI uses that as a direct reference. The Greek section also helps, as its straight lines indicate how long each line of text should be. By combining all 3 languages and all available copies, the system can determine how many symbols should fit in the empty space and which options are the most likely. Behind this entire technology are 2 major projects that made it possible for computers to recognize hieroglyphs. The first is Google's Fabricius, launched in 2020. It allowed scholars and the general public alike to view, understand, and label Egyptian symbols online, enabling the AI to learn. The second is Ubisoft's Hieroglyphics initiative, developed in collaboration with Egyptologists. This involved manually tagging thousands of hieroglyphic images. These 2 efforts together provided the AI with the robust foundation it needed to recognize what each symbol actually looks like. But when AI suggests possible readings for a damaged line, the story doesn't end there. The next step is verification. This is where the vast Egyptian dictionaries and databases come into play. The Thesaurus Linguae Egyptiae allows researchers to see where a word has been used throughout its 3,000-year history. Meanwhile, the Chicago Demotic Dictionary, the product of decades of work, shows how words were used in everyday language, in matters of law, trade, and religion. All of these resources act as a kind of referee. If the AI's suggestion doesn't match Egyptian grammar, or if it settles on a word that doesn't appear anywhere else, it's immediately rejected. But if the same suggestion aligns with a sentence found in another copy of the decree, it's considered correct. One of the great advantages of these modern tools is that they don't just provide a result, but also show how they arrived at that result. Systems like Ithaca and Aeneas clearly indicate which sources they compared, which similar sentences they found, and how confident they are in each suggestion. This has the benefit that any scholar can review the entire process and decide whether they agree with it or not. Nevertheless, the technology has its limitations. The AI cannot conjure up carvings that were never actually on the stone. Experts are careful not to force what the computer says onto the stone. The original evidence always takes precedence. If the direction of a groove visible in the 3D map differs from the model's prediction, the groove itself is considered correct. And if a suggested word is too large for the space available on the stone, it is automatically deemed incorrect. Now that the lost lines are slowly coming to light, the final question remains: what do they actually say? Do these newly added words change our understanding of the decree, the priests who wrote it, or the young king who was so highly praised? When the fragmented lines of the Rosetta Stone were finally pieced together, the stone ceased to be merely an ancient artifact. It suddenly became a living story, revealing how ancient Egypt actually functioned. This story was less about gods or mysteries and more about politics, money, and the lives of ordinary people. 2,000 years ago, Egypt was recovering from years of turmoil. Ptolemy V became king at that time, but he didn't fully wield the real power. The temples and priests held the greatest influence in the country. They controlled the land. They controlled the wealth. And they were considered the voice of the gods. If the king wanted peace and stability, he had to have the support of the priests. The decree inscribed on the Rosetta Stone is essentially the story of this agreement. When the missing parts were discovered, it became clear that it was more of a bargain than a religious proclamation. The king granted certain concessions, and in return, the priests immortalized his praise on stones and walls. The decree clearly states where taxes were reduced, where exemptions were granted, and who received grain or other assistance. What the priests would do in return was also stipulated: daily prayers, special festivals, and ceremonies in which the king would be declared chosen by the gods. The Greek section explains the entire matter in the most straightforward terms. It states that the king reduced several taxes and completely abolished others to lighten the burden on both soldiers and farmers. It also clarified that the government would not impose any new levies on the temple's own income, land, vineyards, silver, and grain. Even the tax on the priests was fixed to prevent any future increases. From the outside, all this might seem like dry accounting, but in ancient Egypt, these decisions determined people's daily lives and the peace of the country. If you enjoy research-based, in-depth videos like this, subscribe to the channel now. Here we explain history, science, and mysteries in a straightforward and easy-to-understand way. By subscribing, you'll be among the first to see our next video.